Sephardi, these are more like Spanish and Arab people. Then you have Ashkenazi, which is those who are European,
Okay.
like who have settled in Europe for a long time and then are here. But that's the racial thing. And then in terms of observance, you have like liberal, reform. I think there's something called Mizorti, which is like between Reform and Orthodox, and then you have Orthodox, but you also have Modern Orthodox.
So is Reform that's not the sect, is it?
It's not a sect, it's a means of practice, a means of interpreting. So my rabbi was a lesbian. There you go. That gives you an idea of the level of kind of liberal, open-minded version of the faith. And so that would be, in Orthodox, I think to an extent it's impossible for a woman to be a rabbi, and it's definitely impossible for someone who is gay to, well, it's not impossible, but it's not well liked,
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah, fundamentally, my premise, this is needless background about myself.
It was just interesting.
No,
It's
but
just good
yeah,
to know,
there's lots of different shades of things. That's why it's hard when you hear the term like, when you hear the term, Jew thrown about. It's like the Jews are doing this. It's like it's tricky because it's not a representative term necessarily. Many people live.
Yeah, exactly.
And oftentimes the term is prescribed to you because we perhaps, with my belief system, I probably wouldn't subscribe to calling myself a Jew if it weren't for all the things that have happened to my ancestors, you know what I mean? So you become a group because you're pushed out together, you know what I mean?
Okay, yeah, fair enough. So with regards to, how many times have you gone back to Israel and Palestine?
Well, physically,
Yeah, physically.
I've never been there in my life. I've no connection to the land, and that's kind of my fundamental premise. I have no connection to this land. I'm a human being that was born here, so the notion that I, for whatever reason, have a right to property and land there, I find quite confusing because I do not believe it is my ancestral homeland personally. But here's where I think there'll be a bit of confusion. But that's because I don't believe the words of the Old Testament.
And
whereas
that's where,
I imagine you do, to an extent, do believe the words of the Old Testament. Yet, weirdly, paradoxically, in a recent conflict, you know what I mean, we'd be fighting the same corner in terms of opposition to the actions of the Israeli government. But we've actually got completely disparate theological perspectives. Me being a non-believer and you a believer,
Yeah, but I think the things that Muslims have been putting forward, and I think regardless of, like you mentioned, what religion you're from or what background you're from, this has been seen as a humanistic thing, rather than.
Absolutely.
I mean, yes, you can link it to the Old Testament and believe that, look, in the Bible, we believe that it's our land. Whilst you've got other Jewish people saying, no, we've been exiled and we're not allowed to return back. Regardless of what your belief is, it comes down to what's actually taking place over there. Yeah, and the inhumane, the disparate, I would say the disproportionate use of force by one side over the other, the responsibility that one side has over the other. I think that's something that a lot of people have been able to kind of highlight as the main issue.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think it's cut through a lot more this time around. I think partially due to the lockdown, in the same way we saw with George Floyd, but acts of injustice is less easy for them to go unchecked and sweep under a rug or fit certain narratives. But then moving on, that's my kind of fundamentalist, like, okay, so I don't support this violence in any way. But you've got a group of people that live there. This place has been a country now for a few generations of people, and as far as they're concerned, and I would agree with them, that's where they grew up. And I think you get in very dangerous territory when you start uninventing countries. And I think you're also in horrible territory when you invent countries as well, because that generally comes from some kind of war or conquest or some kind of misgiving with the powers that be generally that cause countries to come into existence. But I think you can't come to a conclusion by doing that same process. So to get rid of Israel doesn't seem ethical to me in any sense. But what would you say on that matter?
I think the argument that a lot of people are making is you can only get rid of something that exists in the first place. Yeah. So if something doesn't exist, like it's not something that's gone through the correct channels to even get to the current stage of existence, how can then, do you see? Like,
I completely agree with you, but I would say that
you're talking about moving forward, isn't it?
Yeah, but I would say you could say all kinds of countries didn't come into existence via the proper channels, via the proper reasons. I think that will forever be an argument. You could say that about America, but it's and it might be right, and I think it probably morally, and I think you can trace back the way things have passed, and you could probably make a good case in the Hague or whatever that actually, Christopher Columbus, that was bad,
That's a good point, but I think the comparison, I don't think Israel has a comparison with any other country on the planet with regards to the brute force that it's been using, for the amount of time it's been using it, for the amount of UN injunctions it's ignored, for the amount of clear violation of human rights. I don't think any other nation for such a prolonged period of time has been pushing forward, which, I mean, you could use the word apartheid, you can use the word genocide, I mean, whichever buzzwords we can put, but I don't think any other country to that level.
I understand what you're saying, but do you mean any other country ever? Do you mean any other country right now?
Yeah, right now.
Okay.
Right now. Yeah.
And do you mean any other nation that wants to be seen as some kind of UN-worthy Western nation? Because I think there's many barbaric regimes throughout the world. I think the way the Chinese government is behaving currently in regards to human rights, right in front of people, the treatment of the Uyghur Muslims, of the Falun Gong, of any prisoner of conscience, and it is happening on a really grand scale. And I'm not saying these things in defense of Israel. I'm saying the actions of Israel are awful and the actions of this nation are awful. But you are saying comparatively the actions of Israel are worse, and that's where I don't know if I 100% would agree with you, but I would agree that they are awful.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, the Chinese thing is fairly recent. Yeah, it's just been, I would say, maybe 4 or 5 years. But the Israel thing is, that's why I said you can't put anything in the same category as Israel.
The thing with the Uyghurs is quite recent, but however, the actions against
that's why you can't.
But the actions with the Falun Gong, that's the religious meditation where people are getting. It's like the meditation end of Tai Chi that became very popular in China, and this is like 20 or so years back. Yeah, it's not 70 years.
Yeah,
it's not the creation of the state.
There's no other country. I can understand that there are other oppressions taking place. There's other major issues taking place, but the Israel issue is unique.
I think we're kind of getting away from the core point. Are you using what you're saying as a justification to make Israel no longer exist? Is that your premise?
No, not really. What I'm doing is I'm exploring the different viewpoints that people are putting forward. You'll have one viewpoint that doesn't accept that Israel has come through the correct channels for its existence. There's not been any discussion, and I think to extrapolate, therefore Israel doesn't have a right to exist, I think that's a very far-fetched extrapolation from that. This is saying that it's from the get-go. It can't justify a reasonable existence that, say, other nations can. And then you'll have the other group that will say, okay, two-state solution. Yeah, which is something that a lot of people nowadays have been pushing forward, but this conflict has also I'll say highlighted, especially the Israeli ambassador. Her name is a bit
I know who you're talking about. I've seen her on the news a lot.
Yeah.
During the recent.
She's got a
she's
very strange
very
name.
fierce lady.
Yeah, so what she says is the two-state solution, and she came, you know who I'm talking about, isn't it?
Yeah, I know exactly.
She came on Sky and the BBC, and she's mainstream, like she's not fringe. She came and she said, we know, we need to be realistic, the two-state solution is dead.
Yeah. No, and I think that is the general understanding of a lot of people within that community.
And it's because of the settlements. The settlements have come and they have destroyed that.
Completely unlawful.
Yeah, and it still continues to do so.
But I think that the problem it faces is the same problem that many nations face, which is that it's a nation founded on war. And it can be war. It's oftentimes aggression from Israel. And you know, I firmly believe that broadly the actions of Palestine are only in self-defense fundamentally. And I know, you know, I've watched Joseph, who comes out here, is very thorough with his history on these things, and that my ignorance to that is but all I can say is there have been various, you know, intifadas, various wars, various nakbas, various horrific incidents that have caused this place into existence. But that doesn't take away from the fact that a child being born in Israel or Palestine today, they firmly believe they are that thing, and you're never going to be able to remove that from their head. So how do you move forward? I feel like I can see how historically it's very painful to acknowledge Israel as a legitimate state. That would not be the preference of certain communities. But I'm very open to another solution. But I just wonder what else you can do other than kind of.
The thing is, solutions can be very large, far between, and we can, elaborate on them. But I think the solution that matters the most at this moment in time is keeping Israel in check. Because what it's doing, it's going to territories. It's actually what it's using is, you've probably seen the clip that came of Benjamin Netanyahu sitting in someone's living room and pretty much spilling the beans about how he's using his relationship with the US. Well, past tense because he's left now, but the system still hasn't changed.
Yeah.
And
the new guys know better.
Exactly.
So worse in many regards.
So using the allegiance and the ally of the United States and pushing forward despite what the international community is saying. So this pushing forward of settlements, this Sheikh Jarrah, and the likes, there's many areas like this. Now it's Save Silwan, and there's loads of areas. But the thing is, look, you've got aggression of Israel into different areas that the international community doesn't acknowledge Israel's power or the legitimacy in those areas, and Israel continues to go forward. The thing that I've seen, and I don't know how applicable it's going to be, on a realistic level. On a kind of pen to paper level, okay, fair enough. But on a realistic level, I don't know if it's going to happen, and that's economic sanctions. Economic sanctions has worked with other nations. it's crippling nations like Iran, North Korea, and the likes. So it can work. But the thing is, because of, were you aware that for the last 7 months during this whole crisis, there's been joint naval exercises of the UK, Israel, and the US? Were you aware of that?
No, but it doesn't surprise me. They're deeply allied from a long time. What I would say is something I was doing recently. I was involved with a project trying to help.
But just hold on to that thought. Yeah,
absolutely.
But when you said no, I'm not aware of that. You wouldn't be the only one, because it wasn't in the news in the last 7 months. In fact, if you Google it now, it's going to come up, but it's only going to come up in the Jewish newspapers, and the Israeli
what
newspapers.
Exactly was it? So the naval exercises and where?
Yeah, so they were doing joint naval exercises, whilst on the outside this was happening, that look, Israel is doing this, and yes, we should condemn this, we should condemn that. But behind the scenes, you've got this whole kind of unit taking place, supporting each other. But Israel's actions were terroristic. They're terroristic actions. Yeah, the extreme, the illegal actions. But then behind behind the doors, oh, there's naval exercises taking place. And in Israel, if you look at the newspapers, they were promoting this, but in the UK, it wasn't mentioned by anyone. Yeah, but the question would be why? It's because people know that to be affiliated with Israel on a public level, it's not something to be proud of. Yeah, but the point that I was getting to was the economic sanctions, that it's not practical because of UK's relationship, post Balfour Declaration and the likes, and America's, of course, well, they've been unapologetic with their links, especially during the Trump era as well. So I would say economic sanctions, but in order to get them to work, you'd need nations like the UK and the US backing it. But because of the kind of relationship Israel and America shares, it seems very unlikely for it to be taking place. And that's why people are becoming more and more frustrated. Yeah. Now, when people are becoming more, you have to realize, you've seen these movies, isn't it? Where a person comes, they kill the child of the person, and then the dad goes on a rampage. Yeah, he tries to go to the police to get justice. He doesn't get justice. What happens? We've seen these movies.
Some Liam Neeson.
Yeah, vigilante. You know that Gerard Butler.
It's not my favourite kind of film. But
Yeah,
cool.
law-abiding citizen. They start going on a rampage. Yeah, Punisher and all of these.
Revenge.
Yeah,
it's palpable, and when it's to your family, it's undescribable. It's deeply human.
That's exactly what it is. It's undescribable. And when these bombs are falling, Hugh, on a daily basis, you have to understand not everybody is going to be coming from a rational point of view. You will get people, Hugh, that are pissed off, and they have no way of expressing it. In fact, when you've got America saying no, not condemning it, the UK not condemning it, and then working hand in hand, you've got people that are now feeling alienated. Then you've got the Arab countries that are worried more about the economic part. Then you are going to get people that are going to be more inclined to these fringe, extreme groups.
Absolutely.
And then you know what the problem, Hugh, there is? People are then going to be looking at that. Why? Because it's selective outrage.
Sure.
You know what I'm saying?
Well, yeah. I mean, I completely understand what you mean. It's inherently they're being radicalized by their own oppressor. Like, I completely understand that premise. And then, you know, you have a whole battlefield going on, and it can be normal.
It's like I keep slapping you, yeah? But the camera's off. I tell him switch the camera off. Pat, 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 pat. You're patient. Pat, 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 pat. Eventually, you roll your sleeves up. I'm like, switch the camera on, and then you give me a right hook.
Yeah, and
I'm like, yo.
And those who are in charge of the narrative have the power in these situations.
Precisely.
I completely understand what you're saying. To speak to the economic sanctions thing, in terms of practical things we can do now, campaign against the arms trade, have a petition you can sign. It's not a petition, it's a letter writing thing where you can contact your local MP and encourage them to stop the trade of
People
arms.
have been doing that, especially with ELBIT. You heard ELBIT, isn't it?
No.
ELBIT. There've been a lot of because they're the major kind of arms contractors of Israel.
Right, like BAE or something like those.
Yeah, but
weapons.
ELBIT is more kind of, I think 70% of Israel's arms journey through ELBIT.
Because that's the thing, if there's no arms, there's no war, you know what I mean? And on any side and at any point. But I'm not sure if I have an understanding. So you're basically saying from your perspective, you want to see sanctions. I completely agree with you. I want to see Israel be sanctioned, held to account.
Yeah, sanction them, cut relations with them. Yeah, through of course sanctions, because there's different sorts of sanctions that you have. Yeah, before people had sanctions that, you know, we're not going to be sending our aeroplanes, we're not going to be sharing the tourism industry, we're not going to be doing this. Cut them off until they realize, you know what we're doing is not feasible for us.
But you would concede to an extent that the people, they have a right to exist. That the people that are born there, human beings that are born in a location, have a right to exist in that location.
Well, it's not up to me to say, but I mean,
if it were, would you agree that?
The thing is, I think the situation has reached such a stage at the moment. Israel is there. You
Yeah,
can't
that's
deny
what I
that.
mean.
Yeah.
And I'm sure I would.
But I don't want to confuse right with legitimacy though. The fact that it's there doesn't mean that I have to. You know what I'm saying? That's where the two get
I
confused.
understand what you mean. Yeah.
Some will say, so you're unhappy with
Yeah,
the
like
way
a
it was.
God-given right. Yeah, that's not what I'm saying. No. But,
Legitimacy.
but it
no.
may as well. It
Yeah,
may as well.
It's there.
That's what I mean.
I don't have to like it.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's there. We have to make the best of the situation.
But that's kind
But
of.
that's me sitting here in London, not understanding. That's yeah.
But I really think I don't hear that much. You know.
To be honest with you, I don't think anyone denies that. What happens to you is, there's a saying, it says, give him an inch, he'll go a mile. Yeah, and when people start doing that, that's what Israel has done with the likes of Yasser Arafat and the leaders. When leaders come meet them in the middle for the two-state solution, Israel takes a two-state solution, then starts building settlements, starts going forward. People are like, why are you meeting them in the middle? Because when you meet them in the middle, they go 3/4. Because that's what they do. You give them a hand, they'll take your arm, sort of thing. And we've seen that. These are case studies that have happened. Yeah.
But I think for me, what and very selfishly, but what Jews of a progressive disposition want to feel comfortable hearing is that there's
if
not.
we're born in Israel, can we exist in Israel?
Yeah, and I'm not born in Israel, but I know some people that are. I know some people. But yeah, I feel
I
like
understand what you're trying to say.
you need a kind of base level of because otherwise you're on some BMP, you know what I mean, repatriation stuff, and then you lose me at that point.
The thing is, Hugh, think because.
And I appreciate we're not the priority. And I think that's really important. And I'm sorry but you, to an extent, you can only speak from experience to know that there'd be a far more useful allyship between various groups and
bear in mind,
understanding that.
We've discussed three main things. One is Israel right from the get-go didn't follow the correct channels. Yeah, and they can't legitimately call themselves a nation like other nations. That was number one. Number two is the two-state solution that we've obviously. Her name is Trip or something. Her name's coming in my head. The ambassador to the UK. She said the two-state solution is dead.
Yeah, I think that's the view of a lot of.
And then the third view, which is it's interesting to discuss it, because everybody has their view and where they're coming from, and that view is, look, you're saying, okay, because Israel is there, therefore, let them exist over there. But who's got the right to say that though?
I just mean more in a from us, and I didn't come over here to defend Israel.
I know.
I came over here to seek, just kind of seek a broader understanding and a look. I feel like you can't push for a solution until you know the environment you're in. You can't just turn up in a block of flats where there's trouble day one and you need to establish what's going on in this flat and this flat, and there's all kinds of people with all kinds of different views on it, and I really I'm not.
But we're just exploring the views.
Yeah.
And the third view that you said you're not that kind of vibing with, it's this exact view, and the view promulgates that. Hang on a minute, who gave Israel? You're saying, okay, Israel is there, let it remain there, people have the right, but I'm sorry, why are they there in the first place? Who's given them the right? Or the UK with the Balfour Declaration? I'm sorry, they don't have the right to do that. Why, if you've given them Palestine, I mean, hypothetically, you can do the same with Italy, you can do the same with Spain. So if there is another group that goes there, will you now say that because they've gone there, because somebody else has interfered, now suddenly you have to be okay with it? Do you see, Hugh?
I understand what you're saying, because they're using the argument of their historic connection to the land, and they can't use that. But also, I think, just in terms of...
Sorry, this is also a good point as well, that Israel is not a theocracy, is it?
No, it's a secular state.
Exactly. So, but anytime one of the higher-ups speaks about it, the main premise is the Old Testament. In fact, the new leader, in Al Jazeera with his interview with Mehdi Hasan, that's what he said. He said, hey! So, yeah, that's what it is.
Mashallah, nice to see you. Alhamdulillah.
Yeah, actually, you got him out of his
He's going to be
cage.
his couch, but I didn't fit in the train.
Alhamdulillah. Hey man, nice to meet you. Yeah. See you guys.
So yeah,
Sorry, I didn't realize. Were you recording?
what was the last thing that I was saying?
You were saying that they
Theocracy.
use, they use theocracy. Yeah, well, that's a common tactic. So if you're speaking to a secular crowd, you get theological, and if you're speaking to a religious crowd, you get secular, because then you're kind of diverting their expectations of what the discourse will become.
So Hugh, the whole point of me bringing up the three arguments was so you can see that there's room and there's sense in all three of them.
Yeah, I agree.
And of course, us being in London, we are more inclined to the sanctions, to the sanction side, because of course we're not really in there. We're not really experiencing. We haven't lived there. We don't really know the struggles of those people, and both of us are a bit ignorant to the historical context behind it as well.
Absolutely.
But if we were to take that and apply that situation very, very simply, that if a group of people came to Spain, and they settled there and they started taking over, do you now have to be okay with giving them
like
parts?
the Inquisition?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, I didn't like that.
So some people from the get-go, they're like, forget all of this. Let's see where it started from. Like, it started from Balfour. Like the UK said, okay, this belongs to you. But why did they have the right to say that? And do they have the right to say that? So you have to understand, Hugh, that it's people coming and dealing with this at different levels. So you have people that are dealing with it from the root. That, hang on a minute, why are we even entertaining this idea that it's not Palestine? It's Palestine, and somebody's come in through illegal means.
Well, so this guy over there, he's saying like, what is Palestine? It's called Philistine. This is a Roman name, and this is a name given by the Romans. This is, and I think what that argument makes, and that's often a Zionist argument, that like you go back and you go back and you go back and you go back. But I think what it doesn't acknowledge is, because what you could say to him is like, is there a country called Turkey, or like in history, or like, it would have been Ottoman Empire, Anatolia, or whatever. You can. Things change, and there will always be those that are wedded to the origins and stuck in the mud. But oftentimes you find, whilst they're stuck in the mud, barking at each other, there's a new problem. A new problem has arisen, and so it's a case of prioritizing your intentions, and that can sound very.
The thing with that, Hugh, is you're right. If we keep journeying back in time, then sometimes it may seem as something which is very abstract, very difficult to deal with. Let's just say, let's stick with the modern era. If we stick in the modern era and this starts becoming legitimized, that anyone can go, any group of people can go to another country and then settle there, and then everybody will have to recognize it. It's a dangerous precedent to be setting.
Absolutely.
And because that is, it's a very modern issue.
But when you pay tax to this country, that's exactly what you're doing.
Exactly what you're doing?
Well, you're propping up a crown. You're propping up the fruits of colonization. You know what I mean? And so it's inherently entrenched in modernity. It's everywhere. The
it might be a dilute version.
The wealth of this nation is and I agree. And that's just going back. That's going back. But to say that, you know what I mean? I completely am opposed to. I agree. I'm opposed to how the state came to be. I'm opposed to the actions of the state now. The only thing.
And you know what? I have to commend you on that. I have to